Welcome to PVT Express News. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. And now, here's today's content. No one was truly prepared for that moment. Even those accustomed to seeing surprises on the runway froze. Kai stepped out first, followed by Tan Songyun, both carrying glowing laser swords that looked like they had been ripped straight from the future. The lights weren't just accessories, they were the center of attention, cutting through the glamorous atmosphere with a sci-fi feel that was both stark and captivating. The seconds seemed to slow as cameras began flashing non-stop. The photographers, usually calm and measured, now looked both panicked and mesmerized. They raced to capture every angle, every dramatic movement of the two stars who seemed to know how to create unforgettable moments. Kai, with his confident stride and piercing gaze, wielded his red sword as if it were an extension of his charisma. Every pose he struck felt like a scene from a major movie, not just a fashion show. Meanwhile, Tan Songyun presented the perfect contrast, soft yet powerful, elegant yet bold, with a gleaming green sword in her hand. What made this all the more jarring was how they combined seemingly impossible elements. Luxury fashion, synonymous with classic elegance, suddenly met a wild, experimental, futuristic aesthetic. And strangely, instead of feeling strange, the combination felt right. Some guests whispered to each other, trying to decipher whether this was part of a grander concept or an unexpected improvisation. But one thing was certain, no one could tear their eyes away. Even the celebrities who were usually the center of attention were now mere spectators in this extraordinary moment. As Kai paused in the middle of the red carpet, he raised his sword slightly higher, letting the red light wash over his face. The stage lights cast dramatic shadows that made him look like a character from another world. Applause erupted, tentative at first, then louder. Tan Songyun was no less captivating. She twirled slowly, her dress flowing with her movements, while the green light from her sword created an almost magical visual effect. For one brief moment, she smiled, and it was a smile that seemed to convey that she was fully enjoying the beautiful chaos unfolding. The few fashion critics in attendance looked bewildered. They were used to analyzing fabric cuts, silhouettes, and colors. But this time, they were faced with something bigger, a performance that transcended the clothes themselves. This wasn't just about the clothes, it was about the experience. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Short videos of their performances immediately went viral, sparking mixed reactions. Some called it genius, others deemed it overdone. But it was precisely the debate that made the moment even more vibrant. One industry observer was even heard to say that this was a turning point. That fashion was no longer just about traditional aesthetics, but also about the courage to experiment, even if it meant breaking all the rules. As they continued, the atmosphere became more energetic. The background music seemed to adapt, becoming more intense, more dramatic. It was as if the entire show had transformed to match the energy they brought. Kai and Tan Songyun weren't just walking, they were telling a story. Every step, every pose, every interaction with the camera formed a narrative that was difficult to define but easy to feel. A story about the future, about courage, about identity. Several designers in attendance nodded slowly, as if realizing something. That the lines between fashion and entertainment were blurring, and perhaps, that was precisely the beauty. When creativity was no longer confined by categories. As they reached the end of the carpet, the moment wasn't over. They stood side by side, raising their swords simultaneously, creating a fusion of red and green lights that merged in the air. A simple symbol, yet imbued with meaning. The applause was now louder, more sincere. Even those who had initially been skeptical couldn't deny that they had just witnessed something different. Something that would likely be remembered for years to come. Beneath all the pomp, one question remained: was this simply a sensational stunt, or the beginning of a new era in fashion? No one truly knew. But one thing was for certain: standards had changed. As the lights dimmed and they left the stage, the atmosphere was still filled with an indescribable energy. People continued to talk, analyze, even debate. The moment didn't end when they left, it lived on in conversations. Hours later, images and videos of the performance continued to circulate. Every angle, every detail was reanalyzed, as if everyone was trying to capture the essence of what had just happened. But perhaps that essence truly couldn't be fully explained. Because sometimes, magic doesn't need to be fully understood. Sometimes, it just needs to be felt. And that night, on what should have been an ordinary fashion show, Kai and Tan Songyun had created something more than just a show. They had created a moment. But the story wasn't over yet. Behind the scenes, whispers began to emerge from the crew and VIP guests watching from different angles. They revealed that the concept of the performance had been kept secret until the last moment, even from most of the production team. The decision to bring laser swords wasn't just a gimmick, but part of a precisely crafted visual narrative. Some industry insiders said such boldness was rare on such a grand stage. Typically, major fashion houses play it safe, maintaining their image and traditions. But this time, there was something different, as if there was a strong urge to push the boundaries and create something completely new, something that couldn't be easily imitated. Interestingly, the expressions of the other models who walked after them also changed. There was a slight sense of pressure, as if the standard of the show had been drastically raised in a matter of minutes. Some models attempted more dramatic gestures, but the aura left by Kai and Tan Songyun remained unmatched. Meanwhile, fans watching from outside the venue were no less excited. They gathered around the large screens and the entrance, trying to catch a glimpse of the moment. When the footage of the performance was replayed, cheers and screams rang out, creating an atmosphere that almost resembled a grand concert, rather than just a fashion show. This phenomenon has sparked a broader discussion about the direction of the entertainment and fashion industries. Will cross-genre collaborations like this become the new norm? Or is this just a rare moment that will be difficult to replicate? These questions continue to resonate, especially among a younger generation hungry for innovation. Some analysts are even beginning to predict that the future of fashion shows will become increasingly theatrical. That runways will no longer be simply a place to showcase clothes, but a stage for storytelling, a platform for creating experiences that directly touch the audience's emotions. Meanwhile, Kai and Tan Songyun's image is solidifying as icons who not only follow trends but also create them. They are not mere guests, but key elements that change the dynamics of the entire event. Amidst all the spotlight, there's one small detail that loyal fans are beginning to notice: the impeccable synchronization of their movements. It's as if every step has been rehearsed countless times, every pose meticulously calculated, yet it still feels natural and spontaneous. And perhaps, therein lies the true power of this moment. Not just in the striking visuals or the bold concept, but in the ability to make it all feel lived in, real, and meaningful. A show that isn't just seen, but felt, and that will linger long after the lights go out. But the more people talk about it, the more it becomes clear that this moment was more than just a fleeting visual jolt. There were layers of emotions that the audience slowly began to recognize: awe, confusion, even a little intimidation by the sheer audacity of the display. Many began to realize that they were witnessing more than just an act, but a statement. Some fans even began to associate the performance with deeper symbolism. The red and green lights were no longer simply distinctive colors, but rather represented dualities: tradition and future, classic and modern, reality and imagination. This interpretation spread widely, enriching the meaning of an already visually powerful moment. Beneath it all, there was also a lingering curiosity. How did this idea first emerge? Who dared propose such a distinct concept? And how were the two actors able to execute it so flawlessly without losing their identities as elegant public figures? The more questions arose, the greater the fascination. The media began digging deeper, trying to uncover the behind-the-scenes story. But precisely because the mystery wasn't fully revealed, its magic remained. Sometimes, the unknown makes a moment more enduring. As time passed, one thing became increasingly certain: this performance had left a lasting mark. It became a reference, a benchmark, perhaps even a new standard for future performances. Not everyone would agree or like it, but no one could ignore it. And ultimately, perhaps that was the true purpose. Not to please everyone, but to make everyone pause, pay attention, and remember. Because in a world filled with things that are quickly forgotten, a moment like this is a rare thing, something that truly endures. No one saw it coming, not really. Even in a world where fashion thrives on surprise, where seasoned insiders pride themselves on expecting the unexpected, this moment landed like a spark in dry air. The first sign that something was different came not from the lights or the music, but from the shift in attention. Conversations faded. Heads turned. And then, stepping into view with a calm that bordered on cinematic, Shanghai appeared, followed closely by Tan Songyun. In their hands, glowing laser swords. Not props. Not gimmicks. They felt intentional. Alive, almost. The blades hummed with color, his in a vivid, commanding red, hers in a luminous, almost ethereal green. Together, they cut through the polished elegance of the runway like a rupture from another dimension. This wasn't just fashion anymore. It was something else entirely. Time seemed to stretch. Cameras erupted into a frenzy. Photographers who were usually composed, even detached, now scrambled for position. There was urgency in their movements and unspoken understanding that this wasn't a moment you casually documented. This was something you chased. Shanghai moved first with deliberate confidence. Every step he took felt measured, powerful, like he wasn't walking a runway but entering a scene. The red glow of his sword traced along his silhouette, sharpening his already striking presence. When he lifted it slightly, letting the light spill across his face, it transformed him, less like an actor, more like a character stepping out of an untold story. Opposite him, Tan Songyun created a completely different energy, yet somehow, it didn't clash. It completed the picture. Where Shanghai was intensity, she was fluidity. Where he commanded, she invited. Her green blade shimmered as she turned, her dress catching the light in soft waves. There was a quiet power in her movements, a balance of elegance and boldness that felt almost hypnotic. And then, just for a moment, she smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the audience, but as if she was genuinely enjoying the surreal beauty of what was unfolding. That smile lingered. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Guests exchanged glances, whispers spreading like ripples. Was this planned? Was it spontaneous? Was it part of a larger narrative no one had been told? It didn't matter. No one could look away. Even the usual centerpieces of attention, celebrities, influencers, industry icons, became part of the audience. Observers. Witnesses. Because this wasn't just a walk. It was a disruption. Luxury fashion has always been tied to tradition, timeless cuts, refined silhouettes, controlled artistry. But here, in the glow of red and green light, those expectations were being rewritten. Sci-fi collided with couture. Fantasy collided with reality. And strangely, it worked. Not just visually, but emotionally. The applause started cautiously, almost uncertain, then built into something louder, fuller. It wasn't just appreciation, it was recognition. Recognition that something unusual, something difficult to define, had just taken place. For the critics in attendance, the moment was almost disorienting. They were trained to analyze craftsmanship, to dissect structure and material. But how do you critique an experience? How do you measure impact when the clothes are no longer the sole focus? Because that was the shift. This wasn't about what they wore, it was about what they created. Online, the reaction was immediate. Clips flooded social media within minutes. Angles, slow-motion edits, zoomed-in expressions, every detail was examined, debated, reinterpreted. Some praised it as visionary. Others dismissed it as excessive. But the disagreement only amplified its presence. Because indifference would have meant failure. And this was anything but forgettable. As Kai and Tan Songyun moved further down the runway, the energy escalated. The music seemed to evolve with them, growing deeper, more intense, as if the entire production was responding in real time. Their movements became more synchronized, more deliberate, as though each step was part of a larger narrative. And maybe it was. Not a literal story with a clear beginning and end, but something more abstract. A feeling. A theme. A suggestion of ideas, future versus past, strength versus grace, individuality within unity. Designers in the audience watched closely. Some nodded, slowly, thoughtfully. Because beneath the spectacle, there was a realization taking shape. The boundaries were shifting. Fashion was no longer confined to fabric and form. It was becoming performance. Experience. Emotion. By the time they reached the end of the runway, the moment hadn't peaked, it had transformed. Standing side by side, Kai and Tan Songyun raised their swords in unison. The red and green lights crossed, merging briefly in the air. It was simple. Clean. Symbolic. And powerful. The applause that followed wasn't hesitant anymore. It was certain. Even those who had been skeptical couldn't deny it, they had witnessed something different. Something that lingered. But what exactly was it? A bold experiment? A calculated spectacle? Or the first glimpse of a new direction for fashion itself? No one had a definitive answer. And maybe that uncertainty was part of its strength. because long after they exited the stage, the energy remained. Conversations continued in hushed tones and animated debates. Analysts speculated. Fans dissected every frame. The moment refused to settle, it stayed alive, evolving with each retelling. Behind the scenes, fragments of the story began to emerge. The concept, it turned out, had been tightly guarded. Even members of the production team hadn't known the full extent of what was planned. The laser swords weren't last-minute theatrics, they were deliberate, embedded in a vision that prioritized impact over predictability. That kind of risk is rare, especially on such a high-profile stage. Major fashion houses tend to protect their image, to refine rather than reinvent. But this time, someone had chosen differently. And it showed. Other models who followed seemed affected. Subtly, but noticeably. Their movements carried a hint of added intensity, as if the bar had been raised in real time. Some tried to match the dramatic tone, but the atmosphere left behind by Kai and Tan Songyun was difficult to replicate. Outside the venue, the reaction was just as intense. Fans gathered around screens, phones held high, voices rising with each replay. The cheers felt closer to a concert than a fashion event. There was excitement, yes, but also a sense of witnessing something larger than expected. And that's where the conversation began to expand. Was this the future? A blending of fashion and storytelling, where runways become stages and models become performers. Or was this a singular moment, too bold, too specific to be repeated? Younger audiences, in particular, seemed ready for the shift. There was a hunger for innovation, for experiences that went beyond aesthetics and tapped into emotion. Some industry observers even suggested that this might become the new standard, that fashion shows would evolve into immersive narratives rather than static presentations. If that's true, then Kai and Tan Songyun didn't just participate in a moment. They helped define it. And yet, what made it truly resonate wasn't just the concept or the visuals. It was the execution. The precision. The way their movements aligned so naturally, so seamlessly, that it felt unrehearsed even though it clearly wasn't. Every step, every turn, every pause carried intention without losing authenticity. That balance is rare. It's what turned a bold idea into something believable. Something felt. Because beneath the lights, beneath the spectacle, there was something else, something quieter but just as powerful. Emotion. Awe. Curiosity. Even a touch of intimidation. Viewers didn't just watch, they reacted. They interpreted. Some began to assign deeper meanings to the colors, red and green as symbols of contrast, of duality, of opposing forces finding harmony. Whether intentional or not, those interpretations added layers to the moment, making it richer, more enduring. And perhaps that's why it continues to resonate. Not because it was fully understood, but because it wasn't. Mystery has a way of extending impact. It invites people to return, to reconsider, to find new meaning each time. As days pass, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This wasn't just a highlight. It was a reference point. Something future shows will be compared to, whether they try to emulate it or deliberately move in another direction. Not everyone will love it. But no one can ignore it. And in a world where attention is fleeting, where moments are quickly replaced and forgotten, that kind of impact is rare. So maybe the goal was never to please everyone. Maybe it was simply to create something that made people stop, look, feel, and remember. Because sometimes, that's what defines a truly powerful moment, not how perfectly it fits expectations, but how boldly it reshapes them. Please join the discussion. Feel free to leave comments. Welcome to my channel. Thank you all.